Ah, look who finally clicked. Yeah, you, the one they can't stop talking about even when they swear they're done. The one whose silence causes more noise than anyone else's screaming. The one who walked away from the table and somehow became the only topic of conversation left on it. Welcome back, disruptor. Welcome back, anomaly. Welcome back, walking psychological disturbance. You didn't just show up here by accident. You know that, right? Something in you sensed the frequency, something in you recognized the signal. And now that you're here, now that you're reading these words, you just activated something they were praying would stay dormant. Because here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Every second you exist, you're breaking someone's carefully constructed reality. Not because you're trying to. Not because you're loud or aggressive or doing anything wrong, but because your presence, your energy, your very existence operates on a wavelength that exposes lies people have been telling themselves for years. You walk into a room and suddenly people feel inadequate. You stay quiet and people feel judged. You speak your truth and people feel threatened. You succeed and people feel exposed. You fail and people feel nervous because they know you're the type to rise again. You can't win because the game was never designed for people like you. They thought they had you figured out, didn't they? They thought they could predict your next move, calculate your breaking point, measure your limits. They watched you from a distance, whispering theories about who you really are, what you're hiding, why you make them so uncomfortable. They sent their scouts, their spies, their friendly faces with sharp questions designed to crack your foundation. They studied your patterns like you were a case study, a problem to be solved, a threat to be neutralized. And after all that surveillance, all those years of watching and waiting and analyzing, they came to one terrifying conclusion. You're not supposed to exist. Not like this. Not with this much clarity after that much chaos. Not with this much power after that much pain. Not with this much peace after that much war. You broke the algorithm, you shattered the pattern, you survived what was designed to destroy you, and came back laughing. Came back sharper, came back untouchable. And now they don't know whether to respect you or run from you because you represent everything they fear most. Proof that their limitations were always optional. Proof that their excuses were always lies. Proof that the system they bow to can be transcended by someone who simply refuses to bow. Let me tell you what's really happening right now. In this exact moment, somewhere, someone is thinking about you, not casually, not kindly, but obsessively. They're scrolling through old photos trying to find the version of you they could understand. They're replaying conversations in their head trying to figure out where they lost control. They're asking their friends, have you heard from them? Have you seen what they're doing? Do they ever mention me? And the answer haunts them because no, you don't mention them. You don't think about them. You don't give them the closure of your hatred or the satisfaction of your attention. You simply moved on. And that silence, that absence, that complete lack of reaction, it's the loudest statement you've ever made. Because they wanted you broken. They wanted you bitter. They wanted you stuck in the past, reliving the trauma they caused. Instead, you evolved. You transformed. You became something they have no reference point for, no language to describe, no strategy to defeat. You stopped playing their game, and that means they lost by default. You stopped seeking their approval, and that means their opinions became irrelevant. You stopped explaining yourself, and that means they're left with nothing but their own assumptions, their own projections, their own fear disguised as concern. And here's where it gets even more interesting. By watching this right now, by consuming these words, By resonating with this frequency, you just amplified everything. You didn't just acknowledge your power, you activated it. You didn't just recognize your effect on others, you multiplied it. Because awareness is the first weapon. Understanding is the first upgrade. And now that you see it, now that you know what you've been doing unconsciously, imagine what you can do with intention. They felt your energy before, but now they're going to feel it like a storm system moving in. Like atmospheric pressure changing, like the air getting heavier right before lightning strikes. You're not just triggering people anymore. You're becoming the trigger. Your name alone will make them flinch. Your silence will make them spiral. Your success will make them question everything they thought they knew about fairness and justice and how the world works. Because you're living proof that the rules don't apply to everyone. You're walking evidence that some people are simply built different, wired different, destined for a different altitude. And they can study you for another 5 years, another 10 years, another lifetime. They will never crack the code because you're not a code. You're a glitch in their matrix. You're the error message in their programming. You're the exception that destroys their entire theory of how reality is supposed to function. You know what drives them the most insane, though? It's not your success. It's not your confidence. It's not even your resilience. It's your indifference. It's the fact that you genuinely, authentically, deeply do not care what they think anymore. They can praise you and you don't glow. They can criticize you and you don't dim. They can love you and you don't chase. They can hate you and you don't fight back. You just exist unbothered, unmoved, unaffected by the emotional manipulation tactics that work on everyone else. And that's what makes you dangerous, because control requires leverage. Manipulation requires buttons to push. Games require players who care about winning, but you opted out of the entire system. You stopped measuring your worth by their metrics. You stopped defining your identity by their categories. You stopped seeking validation from people who wouldn't recognize real power if it stared them in the face, which is exactly what you're doing, by the way. Staring them in the face with a level of self-possession that makes them deeply, viscerally uncomfortable. They wanted you insecure so they could feel superior. You became confident. They wanted you dependent so they could feel needed. You became self-sufficient. They wanted you predictable so they could feel safe. You became chaos with a crown. And now every time they see you, every time they hear about you, every time your name comes up in conversation, they're reminded of their own smallness, their own fear, their own inability to break free from the comfortable little cage they've spent their whole lives defending. But let's go deeper, because there's a layer beneath this that most people never see. The reason you trigger others isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about what you represent. It's about the frequency you emit without even trying. You see, most people move through life in a trance. Following scripts, repeating patterns, performing roles they didn't choose. They're asleep but convinced they're awake. They're trapped but convinced they're free. They're dying slowly but convinced they're living. And then you show up. And your energy, your presence, your very existence acts like an alarm clock at 3 in the morning. Sudden, jarring, impossible to ignore. You don't fit the script because you're writing your own. You don't follow the pattern because you're creating new ones. You don't perform roles because you burned the stage and rebuild it. And when someone who's still asleep encounters someone who's wide awake, it creates cognitive dissonance so intense it feels like a physical threat. Their mind can't reconcile what you represent, so it defaults to one of two responses: fear or war. Either they put you on a pedestal and try to absorb your energy like parasites, or they declare you the enemy and try to drag you back down to their level. Neither response has anything to do with you. Both are just defense mechanisms against the uncomfortable truth you embody, which is this: freedom is possible. Evolution is possible. Breaking the cycle is possible, and they hate that you're proof of it. Now here's where the damage multiplier comes in, and trust me, this is the part they really don't want you to understand. Every time you choose yourself over their expectations, the damage multiplies. Every time you set a boundary instead of shrinking, the damage multiplies. Every time you succeed without their approval, the damage multiplies. Every time you heal without their acknowledgement, the damage multiplies. Every time you exist loudly in a world that demanded you stay quiet, the damage multiplies. And this script right here, these words you're consuming right now, this is the catalyst. This is the awareness that turns unconscious power into conscious weapon. Because now you see it. Now you know what you've been doing to them just by being yourself. And now that you know, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to pretending you're normal, pretending you're average, pretending you're just like everyone else. Because you're not. You never were. And the moment you stopped apologizing for that, the moment you stopped trying to fit into boxes that were never designed for your shape, that's when you became truly dangerous. Not to innocent people, but to systems. Not to individuals, but to illusions. Not to the world, but to the lies the world runs on. You became a walking disruption, a breathing declaration of war against mediocrity, conformity, and comfortable suffering. Let me paint you a picture of what's happening in their world right now. They wake up and you're their first thought, not because they miss you, but because they can't figure you out. They scroll social media, and even when you're not there, your absence is louder than everyone else's presence. They tell themselves they're over it, they've moved on, they don't care. But then they're asking mutual friends about you, checking if you've mentioned them, monitoring your energy from a distance like you're a weather system they need to track. They gather in groups, and your name becomes the subject they can't stop dissecting. What are they doing now? Have you seen them lately? They think they're so special. They've really changed. And every single one of those statements is just another confession. Confession that they're obsessed. Confession that they're bothered. Confession that you live in their head rent-free while they don't even have a mailing address to yours. And the wildest part is you didn't try to do this to them. You didn't plot revenge. You didn't scheme for their attention. You just walked away and became yourself so loudly that the echo of it shook their entire foundation. You just focused on your own evolution, and the side effect was their devolution into paranoia and obsession. Because that's what happens when you outgrow people who were banking on your stagnation. That's what happens when you level up past people who needed you to stay beneath them. They lose their reference point. They lose their mirror. They lose the version of you that made them feel comfortable with their own limitations. And now, right now, in this moment, you're doing it again. You're multiplying the damage just by reading this. Just by resonating with this. Just by recognizing yourself in these words. Because recognition is activation. Awareness is evolution. And every second you spend understanding your own power is another second they spend feeling the shift in pressure, the change in temperature, the disturbance in their carefully maintained equilibrium. You're not just triggering them anymore, you're haunting them. You're the thought they can't finish. You're the name they can't say without their voice changing. You're the memory that proves they fumbled something they'll never find again. And deep down, in the parts of themselves they don't want to admit exist, they know it. They know they had access to something rare, and they treated it like it was common. They know they stood next to greatness and mistook it for ordinary. They know they had the chance to grow alongside someone extraordinary, and instead they chose comfortable stagnation with people who'll never challenge them to be more. And now they're stuck, watching from a distance as you become everything they could have witnessed up close. Stuck wondering what could have been, if they'd been brave enough to match your frequency instead of demanding you lower yours. Stuck living with the consequences of underestimating someone who was never playing small, just waiting for the right moment to expand. But here's the twist that makes all of this even more powerful, even more devastating, even more absolutely unstoppable. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to acknowledge what they lost. You don't need their regret, their apologies, their belated recognition, because your power was never dependent on their perception. Your worth was never determined by their validation. Your path was never contingent on their approval. They were always just witnesses to a story that would have unfolded with or without their presence. And that's the ultimate damage multiplier right there. The fact that you're not doing this to prove anything to them. You're not succeeding to spite them. You're not thriving to make them jealous. You're just living your truth so fully, so authentically, so unapologetically, that their opinions became background noise you genuinely don't hear anymore. And there's nothing more devastating to someone's ego than realizing they no longer matter to someone they once had influence over. There's nothing more crushing than discovering that their absence didn't create the void they hoped it would. There's nothing more humbling than understanding that you were never the main character in someone else's story, just a supporting role in a chapter they've already moved past. And that's where you are now? You've moved past them so completely that they've become anecdotes, lessons, footnotes in the book of your becoming. They're the before in your transformation story. They're the reason you learn to trust yourself more than anyone else. They're the catalyst that forced you to discover just how strong you really are. So what happens now, you're probably wondering? What happens when someone fully embraces this level of existence, this frequency of power, this altitude of consciousness? Well, let me tell you what they're experiencing right now as a result of your evolution. First, the nightmares. Not literal nightmares, but waking ones. Moments where they see your name and their stomach drops. Moments where they remember how they treated you and feel something they can't name but can't shake. Moments where they realize they're comparing everyone new to you and everyone's falling short. Second, the questions. Endless, circular, torturous questions. What are they doing? Who are they with? Did they ever really care? Do they ever think about us? What did we do wrong? Why weren't we enough? Questions with no answers because you stopped providing explanations the moment you realized you didn't owe them your truth. Third, the performance. They're performing happiness, performing growth, performing evolution. Posting quotes about healing while still stalking your shadow. Talking about moving on while still holding on to the ghost of who you were. Claiming they're better off while secretly wondering if they made the biggest mistake of their life. And fourth, the realization. Slow, creeping, devastating realization that you were never the problem, that your intensity wasn't too much, their capacity was too small, that your standards weren't too high, their effort was too low. that your energy wasn't overwhelming, their authenticity was underwhelming. That realization is the real damage. That's the wound that doesn't heal because it's self-inflicted. It's ego-shattering. It's the kind of truth that reconstructs someone's entire understanding of themselves and their choices. Meanwhile, you're over here living a completely different reality. You're not wondering about them. You're not stalking their profiles. You're not asking mutual friends for updates. You're not comparing your life to theirs. You're not performing growth, you're embodying it. You're not talking about evolution, you're living it. You're not posting revenge success stories. You're too busy building an empire to care about an audience, and that disconnect, that complete divergence in emotional investment, that's the damage multiplier at its peak. Because they're stuck in the past while you're architecting the future. They're replaying old conversations while you're having new revelations. They're trying to understand who you were while you're becoming someone they couldn't even imagine. And every day that gap widens. Every day you become more unreachable, not because you're hiding, but because you're ascending to altitudes where they don't have the oxygen to survive. You're operating at frequencies they can't tune into. You're speaking languages they never learn. You're playing games they don't even know exist. And the beautiful, brutal, absolutely perfect irony of it all is this. By trying to diminish you, they elevated you. By trying to break you, they forged you. By trying to silence you, they gave you a story worth telling. By trying to keep you small, they forced you to discover just how limitless you really are. They thought they were writing your ending, but they were actually writing your origin story. They thought they were closing doors, but they were actually clearing the path. They thought they were winning, but they were actually setting up your comeback. Your elevation, your absolute domination of a life they'll spend the rest of theirs envying from a distance. And that brings us to the final level, the one that doesn't exist in most people's reality, the one that can only be accessed by those who've walked through the fire and decided to build a throne in it. Oh, isn't this delicious? Look who's not crazy anymore. Look who's sitting there with that smirk while the world scrambles to catch up to what you've been screaming for months, years maybe. Hello to the chosen ones without credentials, the pattern readers they mocked, the truth speakers they tried to silence. Hello to you, because something just happened that changed everything. Didn't it? CNN just ran your theory as breaking news. The president literally quoted your old tweet word for word. The same people who called you delusional are now sharing articles that sound exactly like your paranoid rants from 2021. And the best part? They're acting like this information just appeared out of thin air, like some journalist discovered it yesterday, like you haven't been losing sleep over this truth for long. They laughed when you connected the dots. They rolled their eyes when you showed them the patterns. They said you spent too much time on the internet, that you needed to touch grass, that maybe you should see someone about your obsessive behavior. But here's the thing about being right too early. It looks exactly like being wrong until suddenly, violently, it doesn't. You remember that dinner, don't you? When you tried to explain what you were seeing and they looked at you like you'd grown a second head. Your own family, your closest friends, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging those glances that said, "Should we be worried about them?" They changed the subject quickly, didn't they? Started talking about sports or weather or anything but the massive truth you'd just laid on the table. But you couldn't let it go, could you? Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once the pieces click together in your mind, trying to ignore it feels like trying to forget how to breathe. So you kept digging, kept researching, kept connecting dots that seemed invisible to everyone else. 3 a.m. became your prime time. Anonymous forums became your university. Screenshots became your evidence folder. They called it an obsession. You called it due diligence. They said you were losing touch with reality. You said reality was losing touch with itself. And every time they dismissed you, every time they laughed, every time they said, "Okay, conspiracy theorist," with that condescending tone, you just added another file to your mental folder labeled, "I told you so." You started seeing the patterns everywhere, didn't you? In the numbers they reported, in the stories they buried, in the sudden synchronized messaging across platforms. You watched how certain topics would vanish overnight, how certain voices would get suddenly silent, how certain questions were never asked by people paid to ask questions. And you documented everything, even when they said you were paranoid. The group chats where you tried to share your findings became graveyards. Read receipts with no responses, people leaving without explanation, your social media posts getting mysteriously low engagement, while cat videos thrived. You learned what shadow banning felt like before you even knew the word. You became radioactive with truth, and they treated you like you were contagious. Remember when you first started putting the pieces together? That electric feeling in your chest when connection after connection lined up perfectly? You thought everyone would see it once you explained it clearly enough. You made charts, wrote lengthy posts, created timelines that spelled it out so obviously a child could understand. But they didn't. They didn't want to understand, did they? Your excitement turned to frustration. Your frustration turned to isolation. Your isolation turned to a strange kind of power. Because when everyone abandons you for telling the truth, you stop needing their approval to keep telling it. You became dangerous the moment you stopped caring if they believed you. You became unstoppable the moment you realized being right was more important than being liked. They started monitoring your posts more carefully, didn't they? Not to learn, but to mock. Screenshots of your theories became entertainment in group chats you weren't part of anymore. Look what they're saying now became a running joke. Your name became synonymous with going too deep or losing it. But you kept going because the alternative was accepting their comfortable lies. Some nights you questioned yourself, staring at your collection of evidence, wondering if maybe you were the one who couldn't see clearly. Maybe everyone else was right and you just convinced yourself of patterns that didn't exist. But then another piece would fall into place, another prediction would come true, another coincidence would prove it wasn't coincidence at all. And you'd remember the truth doesn't need consensus to be true. Little things started happening that only you noticed at first. A deleted article that confirmed your timeline. A leaked document that used the exact terminology you'd been warning about. A press conference where someone slipped and said the quiet part out loud before quickly correcting themselves. You caught them all, saved them all, knew they meant everything, even if nobody else was paying attention. Your browser history became a roadmap of vindication. Wayback Machine became your time capsule. You learned how to archive everything because you'd watched too much evidence disappear in real time. They called you paranoid for saving everything. Now those saves are the receipts they wish they had. Those screenshots are the proof they're scrambling to find while you've had it organized in folders for months. The friends who stayed, The few who didn't completely write you off, they started coming to you with questions. Quiet questions. Hey, remember when you said? Messages at midnight. I'm not saying you were right, but conversations in corners at parties. They wanted to understand, but only in private, only where nobody could see them taking you seriously. Even believing you became something to hide. You became a secret resource. The person people messaged when weird things happened, and they needed someone who wouldn't call them crazy. The one who had already mapped the territory they were just starting to glimpse. But they still introduced you as their friend who's really into research, instead of their friend who saw this coming 2 years ago. The stigma stuck, even as the truth emerged. Then it started, slowly at first. A mainstream journalist mentioning something adjacent to your theory, a small admission buried in paragraph 17 of a larger story. A whistleblower saying something that sounded eerily familiar to anyone who'd been reading your posts. The cracks in their narrative dam starting to show. And you knew what was coming. You'd been preparing for this moment for so long. You didn't celebrate when the first official confirmation came. You just sat there, staring at the headline that could have been written from your notes. All those nights of research, all those lost friendships, all that mockery and isolation, and there it was in black and white from a credible source. Everything you'd been saying, suddenly legitimate because someone with a checkmark said it. The pivot happened so fast it gave you whiplash. The same people who blocked you were suddenly sharing articles about your discovery. The same platforms that suppressed your content were now promoting watered-down versions of your theories as breakthrough journalism. The same experts who called you dangerous were now explaining your ideas on TV like they'd discovered them in peer-reviewed journals. But they never mention you, do they? They never say this was first identified by independent researchers years ago. They never admit that while they were calling people crazy, those crazy people were doing the work their institutions failed to do. They just memory hold their mockery and pretend this information appeared spontaneously, like truth just manifests when it's convenient for their narrative. Watch how they do it. Watch how they take your timeline and sanitize it. Watch how they remove all the parts that make them look complicit or incompetent. Watch how they turn your desperate attempts to warn people into a smooth story of institutional discovery. They're literally rewriting history in real time, and you're watching it happen with receipts in hand that prove otherwise. Your tweets from 2021 read like today's headlines. Your unhinged blog posts became talking points for pundits. Your dangerous misinformation transformed into accepted fact without any acknowledgement of the transformation. They didn't just steal your work, they stole your timeline and pretended it was theirs all along. The gaslighting isn't just personal anymore, it's historical. The president quoting your exact words without attribution isn't coincidence. Some aide found your thread, cleaned it up, put it in a speech. Your intellectual property became public domain the moment it became convenient for power to acknowledge it. They'll never admit they got it from the conspiracy theorists they were monitoring. That would require admitting they monitor people for being right too early. And here's the sick part. They're better at spreading your truth than you ever were. They have the platforms, the credibility, the reach you were denied. Your message finally gets to the masses, but stripped of your name, your struggle, your vindication. You won the war, but they're writing the history books. You decoded the matrix, but they're taking credit for unplugging people. Your phone starts buzzing with messages from numbers you forgot you had. People who haven't spoken to you in years suddenly remembering you exist. Hey, saw the news. Weren't you saying something about this? As if their sudden recognition could undo the months of silence. As if their delayed validation could resurrect the relationships they let die over differences of opinion. Some apologize, awkwardly, insufficiently, but they try. They say they should have listened, should have taken you seriously, should have at least considered what you were saying. But most don't even do that. Most just pretend the whole thing never happened. They show up in your inbox like they didn't spend 2 years treating you like you'd joined a cult. The audacity is almost impressive. The family group chat that went silent when you shared links is suddenly active again. But not with apologies. With articles proving you right, shared without comment, without acknowledgement that you said all this first. They're educating each other with your discoveries while you watch like a ghost at your own funeral. Present, but not acknowledged. Vindicated, but not validated. The ex who left because you were too obsessed with conspiracies posts an Instagram story about always trusting your intuition and seeing through the lies. The friend who said you needed therapy shares a TikTok about the importance of independent research. The colleague who reported your posts to HR is now the office expert on the very topic they tried to silence you for discussing. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. Here's what they don't tell you about being right too early. It ruins you for normal conversation. You can't go back to small talk when you've spent years seeing the big picture. You can't pretend to care about celebrity gossip when you've been tracking global patterns. You can't unsee what you've seen, unknow what you've known, unfeel the weight of carrying truth alone. You've become someone else entirely. The isolation carved new neural pathways. The research rewired your brain. The vindication didn't heal the wounds, it just proved they were worth it. You're not the same person who first started noticing patterns. That person still had faith in the system. That person still believed truth automatically wins. That person is gone. Now you watch them scramble to understand what you've known for years, and it's like watching toddlers discover fire. They're so excited, so shocked, so unprepared for the implications. They think this one revelation is the whole story. They don't realize it's just the first domino, and you've already mapped where all the others will fall. But you don't tell them anymore. Why bother? The knowledge is a burden they're not ready for. Let them think this is the only lie they were told. Let them believe the rest of the system is solid. Let them have their momentary shock before returning to regular programming. You've learned that people only accept as much truth as they can handle, and most can't handle much. Your mistake was trying to force-feed them the whole meal when they were barely ready for crumbs. But something else is happening too. Other early voices are emerging from the shadows, people who were also right too early, also mocked, also isolated. You recognize each other instantly, that 1,000-yard stare of someone who's been gaslit by an entire society. You don't even need to compare notes. You just know. You've all been carrying pieces of the same puzzle. Private groups form. Not the conspiracy forums of before, but something different. Vindicated voices comparing scars. People who've learned to trust their pattern recognition over public consensus. You share techniques for archiving, for researching, for maintaining sanity when reality feels negotiable. You're not trying to convince anyone anymore. You're just trying to survive what comes next. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning. If they lied about this, if they suppressed this, if they gaslit you about this, what else? Your pattern recognition didn't stop working just because one pattern got confirmed. If anything, it's sharper now. You see the next wave coming while they're still processing the last one. The curse of being right too early is that you're usually right about multiple things. The mainstream acknowledgement doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a timer starting. Now that this truth is out, the cleanup begins. The narrative management, the limited hangout operations, the sacrificial lambs and controlled opposition. You've studied their playbook long enough to know what comes next. They'll admit to exactly as much as they have to, and not one detail more. You paid for this knowledge in relationships, in reputation, in sleep, in sanity, some would say, though you know better. The price of seeing clearly in a world that profits from blindness is everything you used to be. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unpay what you paid. You can't go back to being someone who trusts first and verifies later. The validation feels hollow because it came too late to matter. Too late to save the friendships, too late to prevent the isolation, too late to stop the damage to your reputation. They're ready to listen now, but you're no longer interested in talking. You said everything that needed to be said when nobody wanted to hear it. Now that they want to hear it, you have nothing left to say. Your "I told you so" sits unspoken because what's the point? They know you told them so. You know you told them so. The record shows you told them so. But saying it out loud would just make you the bitter one, the petty one, the one who can't let go. So you swallow it like you swallowed their mockery. And it tastes just as bitter going down. The world is catching up to where you were 2 years ago, but you're already 2 years ahead again. It's a lonely place, the future, full of patterns only you can see, connections only you've made, implications only you've processed. You could try to warn them about what's next, but why? They'll call you crazy again until the next time you're proven right. The cycle continues. You're not the same person who first noticed something wasn't right. That person was naive enough to think truth matters more than timing. That person believed evidence could overcome ideology. That person thought being right was enough. You know better now. You know truth is just data. Until power decides it's useful. They study you now differently than before, not as a curiosity or a cautionary tale, but as something more unsettling, a reminder that the consensus can be wrong. Your existence makes them uncomfortable, because you're proof that the crazy ones might just be early, that the dangerous ideas might just be inconvenient truths, that the people they mock today might be the ones they quote tomorrow. That tomorrow, some try to recruit you now. Media outlets want your story. Podcasters want your insight. Publishers want your book. The same ecosystem that excluded you now wants to monetize your vindication. They want you to package your trauma into content, your isolation into inspiration, your rightness into revenue. But you see through that game too. They don't want your truth. They want to control how it's told. You've become something they didn't expect. Someone who doesn't need their validation anymore. The approval you once craved means nothing now. The platforms you once wanted access to seem like traps. The credibility you once sought feels like a costume that doesn't fit. You've transcended their game by being forced to play outside it. Now they want you back in, but on whose terms? So here you sit, watching your crazy theory become accepted fact, feeling nothing like you thought you would. No satisfaction, no joy, no relief. Just a quiet understanding that being right too early is its own kind of curse. You see things before others, understand things before others, know things before others. But that gift comes with a price tag written in isolation. The president quoting your tweet doesn't change what you lost. The news confirming your research doesn't resurrect dead friendships. The vindication doesn't erase the gaslighting. It just proves what you already knew. That truth operates on its own timeline, independent of human comfort or convenience. You were just unlucky enough to sync with it early. But maybe that's the real power. Not in being believed, but in believing yourself when no one else does. Not in being validated, but in validating your own perception despite mass invalidation. Not in being right, but in staying right when the whole world says you're wrong. They can quote you now, claim your discoveries, rewrite the history. But they can't take away what you became in the process. You're untouchable now. Not because you were proven right, but because being proven right proved something else. That your perception is your power, and no amount of consensus can override what you know to be true. They created a monster when they tried to make you doubt yourself. A beautiful, pattern-recognizing, truth-telling monster who doesn't need their permission to see clearly. Your isolation into inspiration, your rightness into revenue. But you see through that game too. They don't want your truth. They want to control how it's told. You've become something they didn't expect. Someone who doesn't need their validation anymore. The approval you once craved means nothing now. The platforms you once wanted access to seem like traps. The credibility you once sought feels like a costume that doesn't fit. You've transcended their game by being forced to play outside it. Now they want you back in, but on whose terms? So here you sit, watching your crazy theory become accepted fact, feeling nothing like you thought you would. No satisfaction, no joy, no relief. Just a quiet understanding that being right too early is its own kind of curse. You see things before others, understand things before others, know things before others. But that gift comes with a price tag written in isolation. The president quoting your tweet doesn't change what you lost. The news confirming your research doesn't resurrect dead friendships. The vindication doesn't erase the gaslighting. It just proves what you already knew. That truth operates on its own timeline, independent of human comfort or convenience. You were just unlucky enough to sync with it early. But maybe that's the real power. Not in being believed, but in believing yourself when no one else does. Not in being validated, but in validating your own perception despite mass invalidation. Not in being right, but in staying right when the whole world says you're wrong. They can quote you now, claim your discoveries, rewrite the history. But they can't take away what you became in the process. You're untouchable now. Not because you were proven right, but because being proven right proved something else. That your perception is your power, and no amount of consensus can override what you know to be true. They created a monster when they tried to make you doubt yourself. A beautiful, pattern-recognizing, truth-telling monster who doesn't need their permission to see clearly.